This is the first year that I have experienced.
Come
the
stand
gas
right here.
stove. I'm just watching the thing here.
Okay.
But I'm sure my father disapproves, and I'm sure my mother is cheering loudly.
About what?
Well, the gas stove.
Oh, the gas stove, right.
Mother might not be cheering so loudly if we'd got rid of the wood stove, but we have no intention of doing that. Better stop watching it. A watched pot never boils. Oh, I know. I'm waiting to put some hot water into it.
Now, what year would this house been built?
This cabin?
This cabin.
The winter of 31, 32.
And who built it?
Mr. West, C.W. West, Bud West, who built French River Lodge. Do you remember them?
I don't.
No, I guess Lyman was running French River Lodge when you were small. Oh, it was gone to the Hindmarshes, had it?
I don't even remember. Was it closed for a season, the French River?
I think it was for a little while, and then somebody took it back over and got it going again. Oh, we're almost there. You don't take any white in it? Milk or?
Cream, no.
That's one of my earliest remembrances of Nashville. Our first trip down, we went down by train, and with our two small daughters, and Ian was on the way, and we were taken in Nashville. You probably know the corner to the Maxwell House,
Right.
to look for the drop that was good to the last.
It smells good.
Yeah, it's freshly ground. The President's Choice fine or extra fine ground is what I drink all the time.
And what about the painting up there? Is that something?
It's just a, it's on some. It's very fragile. If we tried to take it down, it would probably fall apart. In fact, if you look hard, you can see bits have come out. The reason it's there is that my dad had a great friend who was a university professor, went through the war, and Dad met him after the war, and they were great friends, and he was a great fisherman, and it looks a lot like him, including the pipe.
Oh, yeah.
So I forget where it came from, but he said, "Oh, that looks like Bill, we'll put it up." And I'm trying to stay right out of things now because Penny and Frank are obviously putting their imprint on it.
Sure.
And they're very good about consulting me, and I keep saying, "Look, it's nice of you, but it's your baby." For instance, we had a great conference about those fish, which had been all over the place, and now they're swimming in one corner. You'd remember that, going down to the bay with your dad, and we went down several times with your dad and Patricia and Hunter and Emmy, and I can't remember that Clara was there, and all kinds of kids. And I remember one day I said to Hunter, "Let's go out and catch some bass," and he looked at his watch and said, And I said, "Why?" He said, "They don't come in till 6 o'clock. And so we went out at 6, and they all apparently come in from the bay to feed, and did they ever. It's the only time I've ever caught fish on a plastic worm. There were so many of them down there, they were so scared of missing something.
Now, what ages were your children when they first started coming up here?
Barbara came up, and she had just turned 2. that was the year they came out from England. And I finished at the College of Education, and I did well enough they didn't have to write my exams, so I got most of May, June, July, and August off. And in the course of which we came up here, went back, moved to Port Hope. Barbara, unfortunately, doesn't come here much, but all her children have been as young people. They've been here. She and her husband have been here a couple of times, but then the children, we used to get them, after I retired, we used to get 2 at a time down from the west. And but it's a little far to come from southwest Alberta for a weekend.
Right.
And
So Penny's and Frank are mostly the ones that come now.
Frank and Penny, because they live close, and they love it.
Mm-hmm.
And so do their children.
Yeah. Good.
So
What are the ages of their children now?
Amy's 25 and a half, so Andrew's 27, going to be 28. And I'm getting old. How many great-grandchildren have you got?
I have no great-grandchildren.
I have 4.999. In fact,
And when will the other
well,
0.100 deliver?
any day now. I mean, that's why it's 4.99.
Whose child?
Stephen and Dawn are having a third. They've got 2 girls. And Janet's wedding was originally last weekend, or no, the weekend before last. And then she said, when she heard that this was coming, she said, well, I'm not getting married without Stephen and Dawn there, so she put it off till August, which is why I'm going to miss the great day in Windward Island. I was going to say celebration, but he doesn't seem to think it's a celebration.
Oh, you're talking about Hunter?
Yeah.
August 13th?
Yeah. Which is, let's face it, a landmark.
He'll be 80?
He'll be 80. A Loon mug
Yes.
from Longview, Alberta.
Oh, good.
Help yourself to sugar and stir like hell.
All right, sir.
And I'll put the rest in the... There's something you can investigate. I'll look it up. I'll look up the date in the visitor's book for you. It was while my mother and father were here, and your Uncle Hunter and Clara and Keith, Clara and Cornelia stayed with Mom and Dad for, I think it's 3 days. And I'm wondering if something happened and well, it'll be your grandparents had to go down somewhere, and I'm sure Mom and Dad said, well, why do you take the kids down? You weren't talking to your Uncle Hunter about the war.
No. But we spent, a good while doing that back in Nashville.
Because what I'm wondering is, did he tell you the story of how he nearly joined the Canadian Army?
No, he did not tell me that.
Well, we both had I had my papers in 5 different regiments. And I was in my last university, and they wouldn't take me, and I'm very glad they wouldn't now. But I would obviously have taken the first one that came through. And I graduated, and we went to Camp Niagara for 2 weeks, militia. And when I came back, my machine gun regiment papers were through, and I took it. A week later, my Royal Regiment of Canada papers came through, and they were at Dieppe. Well, Hunter and Cecil Sims, left here, and they went down to Toronto. Needless to say, his parents didn't know anything about it. And it sounds to me as if they probably went in somewhere for a beer, and there were guys in uniform, and the next thing I knew, they didn't realize it, it'd be a recruiting sergeant for the Essex Scots, which come from Windsor, Ontario, and a lot of Americans joined them, just crossed the border. And he tried to sign them up, and they went to the American consul, and the American consul wouldn't give them clearance until they had clearance from their parents. The Essex Scots were also at Dieppe, and might have been interesting.
Well, are you ready to have a seat?
Yeah.
Okay, do me a favor.
The other day, my mother and father had a belated honeymoon in 1919. Dad being wounded in 1917 for the second time and sent back to Canada. I interrupted a honeymoon plan in 1918. I mean, he couldn't have one in 1917. A, he was working. B, he was recovering from his wound. So in 1919, they came up here. Dad used to buy records and, in fact, that gramophone from Paul Hahn Sr. on the corner of Bloor and roughly the corner of Bloor and Yonge in Toronto. And he happened to mention that he was going up into this country, and Paul Hahn Sr., Paul's father, said, "I've got a cabin up there." And Dad had the map put out by Mickey's, the luxury grocers. So he showed Dad on the map, and he said, "You're welcome to use it." So they came up, I don't know what month, in 1919, found the island, paddled down from the Pickerel, from the CN Pickerel, and the fire rangers were in it. And they said, "Oh, sorry, Mr. Hahn said we could use this." And they said, "Oh, no, don't worry about us." They went over and broke into the McDonald place on the main, I don't know what you call it, Windward Island, and what's the other one? One where Aunt Clara is now. And of course it wasn't as snazzy as it is. And they didn't do any damage, they just were getting in out of the rain and the weather. And so Mom and Dad went down the Bad and down the French and all around here, and they narrowed their choice down to 2 islands, this one and the one that French River Lodge is on. And we were always very thankful they chose this one. And I'm a little vague. If I go and get the visitor's book, I can give you some dates.
That's fine.
Will I interfere with things?
Just watch the wires.
Yeah. I nearly hit that boom, too. In 1923, to the one-roomed house that they had built, you had to put a place, if you bought land, you had to put a dwelling on it.
Right.
And then I see we didn't come up again till 25. Mom had some illness in there, that may have been it. And then there was a pause because my sister was born in 26, and we seem to have come up en masse in 29.
And just hold that book in your hand and let's have a look at it. and what is that?
It's it's called The Visitor's Book, and now we're on volume 3, but this is the one that it didn't start, people didn't start signing it until 1935. But up to that time, Mom kept track of everybody, and it's great to know who were here. And even before we got to sign it, there were some people that were quite interesting. And once we sign it, in 1935, there's a picture of signature of Jimmy Goodson, who was a great friend of ours, was in the Athenia, torpedoed with his mother, mad, joined the Air Commonwealth training plan, went over and fought in the Eagle Squadron with a lot of Americans. When the Americans came into the war, he joined the USAAF and was he was a major eventually in a string of decorations, one of their fighter aces. and was eventually taken prisoner, but he spoke good German, so he it's not relevant to what you want, I guess, but he demanded they better treat him fairly well because Reichsmarshal Goering was expecting him. And they said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I'm not unknown over here, and I'm sure the Reichsmarshal would want to see me. So, anyway.
So he came up here.
He was up here just for 1 year that time, and quite a few other guys, some of whom didn't come through the war. But anyway, this is our reference to know what happened when.
It's interesting, at our house, the reference are the photographs on the wall.
But are they dated?
Some are, yes, from 1911. And then others at Uncle Neil's house, they kept fishing licenses as the way to record visitors.
I remember them in the old cabin. I was telling Clara the other day that I remember Mom and Dad being invited down by, wait a minute, it'd be your great-grandparents for a formal dinner. And I mean formal, Dee was there in a white coat serving the meal. And there were 3 small boys, Bob and me and Hunter, very much keeping quiet and being seen and not heard sort of thing. But and I remember the old walls, I mean the uprights and so on, as she still has kept it on the east wall. And I remember all those licenses. And it goes back a long way. As I say, I do not remember ever not knowing Jack Ball and Hunter MacDonald. And so he's a little annoyed. We came up in 1923, and I don't think he came up till 24 or 25. So although the MacDonalds have been up here longer, Bob and I have been up here longer than he has. So this is a tease thing, you know. I don't think it's blighting his life.
Well, how did your grandparents, your parents,
my parents,
and my great-grandparents meet?
Well, when Mom and Dad were up here, your great-grandfather must have been here with Eloise Gordon, his wife, because I remember he had a DP. Did you remember it, or did you hear of it? It was a skiff, about 16, 18 feet long, pointed at both ends, and it had a single-cylinder engine in the middle, and you could let the propeller down through the floor, and it pushed it. And if you got into the Wanapateh or somewhere, you could pull the propeller up and just use oars, though it'd be heavy. And I remember one picnic they took us on, we went down to Les Dalles, or the Dalles Falls, and we had nothing but canoes. And our 3 canoes were in line astern, and we just sat there, Bob and I, in each canoe with a paddle just in case, and it was a wonderful way to travel. And the thing I remember most about your great-grandfather was his sitting on, well, the old veranda. Well, it would be, I don't know whether it would be this one or the old one, probably this one, just newly built, and telling my parents that he remembered when he was a boy, Robert E. Lee coming to their house. And Robert E. Lee's always been a hero of mine, and not only as a gentleman, but as a soldier. I've studied his campaigns and all that sort of thing for professional reasons. And so I was just enthralled. I mean, here was living history as far as I was concerned. And of course, your grandfather and my father had World War I in common. And of course, your uncle and I have and Bob have World War II in common, and so on and so on. So we overlap in lots of ways. And I know my wife and I both felt that we had an American family, American branch. And of course, I'm teasing your cousin, Hunter, who is now the head of or a big wheel in the Sons of the American Revolution. Of course, my parents on both sides, mothers and fathers, are United Empire Loyalists. They got kicked out of the colonies by the rebellious colonists, and you know, I tease him a bit about it, and he teases me back. And I better not waste. Ian got his own back at the Americans once, but that's irrelevant to what you want to know.
What was it like? Do you remember the first time that you met Hunter?
I don't remember the first time. It was just that here were other kids to play with. Now, when they materialized, I don't know. And you quickly ran out of areas to play in on your island. So, I mean, the original island, you had a much bigger one when Rob bought that. But they often came down here and played, and we played trail through the woods. And of course, we fished, and we just chewed the fat. And but it was nice to have somebody else. I mean, your dad and Hunter and Bob and I were pretty much a foursome on a lot of things. And I mean, I think it was probably fun for us both. Somebody our age instead of all those ancient people.
And how old were you when you first started playing with them?
Well, I'll guess. If it was 25, I'd be 8. 9. No, I'd be 7. So before we hit double figures, I would think. And of course, your uncle's just a kid. And in fact, my brother's older than he is. I think he and Jack Ball were much of an age.
And what year were you born?
1918. And
what were you doing when the war started?
I was at university. I finished school in '36, and I went to university. And a lot of us could see something coming. So I joined the COTC, the Canadian Officers Training Corps. And you did so much a week, and it was pretty elementary training. They didn't, in typical Canadian fashion, they didn't have any equipment, and had very keen instructors. But looking back, I realized my first machine gun lieutenant's qualification, which I got before I graduated from the university, was really based on World War I. And when I went into the active service force in 1940, nobody would take me in 39, thank goodness, as it turns out. When I went in 1940, they took us new boys and sent us on a 16-week machine gun course in Valcartier, Quebec, at the end of which I received an identical certificate to the first one, different number. But I certainly knew an awful lot more, and had fired the gun and used it and so on.
During the war, did it stop everybody from coming to Canada, coming to the French, as you call it?
My parents, you mean? No, they came up at intervals. When Dad didn't get many holidays, and of course he was busier than ever with wounded coming in. And but they got some holidays, and I remember Mother writing and saying, you know, how lovely it was, and she felt guilty about being up here. And I wrote back and said, well, for heaven's sake, I'm glad somebody's there and enjoying it, and save some fish for me when I get home, sort of thing, because Bob and I want to go fishing. And so they did come up for a while.
Did you ever run across Hunter during the war?
I never did, but you heard the story of Jack Ball, I guess.
No.
Well, Hunter, your grandparents were highly amused. It must have been Easter 44, I would think, although I'm not sure, but I think it must have been. And he decided it was Easter and he'd go to church, which I don't think he does sort of regularly, and in Westminster Abbey. And he knelt down at the rail beside Jack Ball. So they had a little reunion afterwards. But Bob and I bumped into Jack I remember once. you got very little leave, and it went by very fast. 36 hours, Prue and I would have, and Bob and I would have maybe a few days together, or maybe just a weekend. Weekend was Saturday noon to Sunday night, so 36 hours. And when you are ready for your train, you've got a lot of time. You get there ahead of time in wartime, and they had in the big stations a news theater which ran newsreels all the time, and you could go in and out, and it didn't really matter. You weren't missing any major plot development if it had been a movie. And Bob and I were watching one of these, and I finally said, apparently, well, I guess I better get going. My train. And a voice behind us says, "That sounds like the Dales." And it was Jack. So we went outside and had a quick reunion, and then I took off, and I think he and Bob had a little longer before their trains came. And
is Jack Ball still alive?
no,
No.
he died early in '98, the same year Prue died later. One of the last things we did, I guess, we went over with Bob and Mary to his funeral.
Well, tell me about the first time you brought your bride here, and what that was like.
Well, as a preamble, when we were engaged, I stayed with an aunt of mine in Wardgrave, Berkshire, on the Thames, and she invited my fiancée down for the weekend, obviously to give her the once-over and report to my parents. But I found a Canadian canoe, cedar strip canoe, made in Peterborough, Ontario, in the boat livery. They didn't have a canvas canoe, which of course is the legal one, but so we rented it, and I took her out in the Thames and gave her her first paddling lessons. So when we came up here, which was I can't remember, roughly the beginning of July, I suppose I could find it here, Prue and Barbara and I, and Barbara was just 2. We came up, of course, by train overnight, got dumped in Pickerel River, Ontario at 5 in the morning. Not the best advertisement for Canada, but I remember we went over to French River. Mr. West met us. We went over to French River Lodge and had breakfast, because I knew we had a lot to do, and let's at least get fed. And we came here, and Prue says in her diary that, the place was pretty dirty, because apparently they'd heard I was coming home, and they just dropped everything and went back. So they didn't do the usual cleanup. So we did. Anyway, the next day, she's just loved. She says in her diary, this is a heavenly place. And she really fell in love with it and never ceased to. And of course, that's been passed on to our children and grandchildren, and maybe someday great-grandchildren. It's always been a focal point of we used our summers up here. See, we had a garden in Toronto about the size of, less than the size of that deck, I would say, and the city. So they had the place, and so Mom and Dad decided that Mom would come up here with us, and she'd bring a spinster friend with her, so she'd have somebody to talk to. And then we would do the chores, and we'd work all morning after breakfast, and then we'd have a swim, and then we'd have lunch, and then the rest of the day was up to us. And that's when we did a lot of the fishing and canoeing and swimming. Well, we always swam 3 times a day usually. So we sort of got into the same routine. We were up here by ourselves in 46 for a while, and then Mom and Dad came up. We moved down to a tent floor and a tent where the boathouse now is. But, and of course, Barbara just blossomed in it.
One of the things I remember about Prue is that she would always get on me and my brothers about our ankles being dirty.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Huh. I suspect that was more to get a rise out of your father than anything else. See, he was always picking something. He commented on her accent, which he loved. And
well, he must have been very fond of her, because
I think
she
he
has
was.
a very prominent photograph on the wall.
I think they were very fond of each other. they differed on a lot of things. She was a very devout Christian, and your dad had ins and outs. And I know how he was exploited by somebody. Can I stop for a minute and get my binoculars? That bird will go, of course.
Yeah.
But,
Yep.
no, I'm not
You
wired.
can just leave that on. Just watch your head.
I saw something go over that looked like a woodpecker, and I haven't seen one. I'm pretty sure he went down in the woods. They always do.
Oh, did you look already?
Yeah, I saw something fly over just as I went out. That always happens. I don't see him up there now. It's only important in that I'm trying to keep a record of, oh golly, I better go and check the battery. I'm trying to keep a record of what's up here, year over year. Well, we're doing fine.
Well, while we're up and talking, tell me about this chimney and the fireplace.
Fireplace. Well, Mom and Dad specified they wanted a fireplace like the one Mr. West put in at their lodge, and so that was put in. And those windows, by the way, were only the upper half. The lower half was logs. And when Gay Gordon was working his restoration, he do you want to take a picture of the regiment? Because you can move that.
Are you in it?
Yep. With the Colonel-in-Chief.
Let's see. Where are you in this picture?
Front row, second from your right hand. No, second from there.
Good. Great.
I was privileged to be in the front row. I was the adjutant at the time.
Oh, you were?
I was at that time, yeah. And so I can tell you, a royal parade is really something. You have a very humbling position. In the march past, you are the last officer in the whole outfit. The commanding officer's at the front and you're at the rear.
My wife and I were present at the Queen Mother's 100th birthday practice
In London?
in London.
Well, then you saw some of the regiment.
I did.
Yeah,
It's fabulous.
my regiment.
Yeah. Oh, I did.
Yeah, because they were, you know, she was our Colonel-in-Chief for 65 years.
Gee.
And
You really, I mean, as an American, you really got the sense of the real warrior spirit that is on England.
well, and it wasn't just a title with her. I mean, she took a very keen interest. When Julian Chapman was appointed commanding officer, she told the honorary colonel, I'd like to meet him. So, Julian and his wife, and Hugh Stewart and his wife, and the honorary lieutenant colonel went over and were invited to lunch at Clarence House. And she, you know, they had a nice lunch, and then she took Julian off and sat him down in a chair and said, now tell me what's going on in my regiment. And of course he had to be careful, because he say, well, the Canadian government is acting in its usual fatuous manner. But he told her, I mean, he couldn't, she's not allowed to comment politically anyway. But she wanted to know, and boy, you don't hold out on her. she took it very seriously. And if you watch the funeral on television, you know where the casket was carried into the abbey? There were lines of troops on either side. There were 4 from every one of the regiments of which she was colonel-in-chief, and she had laid that down in her will.
Wow.
Or in previous arrangements anyway. So the present honorary colonel I taught, so it's quite fun. He's just finished calling me sir.
Okay.
Because
Bear with me one second. I'll be right back.
The butler's got lots of coffee in it.
That's what I'm going.
Good.
Well, just as we were talking, you were talking about Prue and my father having some differences about Christianity, and she was a devout Christian. It sounds like you may have a guest pulling up.
What time is it? It wouldn't be your...
No, I don't think it was them.
I'm looking. One of the names in here he didn't sign because he was before we had the visitors book. Was turned out to be one of my brother. Oh, there it is, 23. He was in the regiment when I caught up with them, and he was seconded to the British in 1943 and was killed in North Africa in a very gallant operation. I mean, his company was caught out in the open, and they thought it was a patrol they were beating off, and it turned out to be a major German attack. And he just had time to get word back about what it was, but they were pinned down on this tableland, and the only thing we knew afterwards is his sergeant major survived, was taken prisoner, wounded and taken prisoner. And he said, he just said, okay, we got to fight with everything we've got, and fight as you've never fought before. And he was found dead with an empty revolver across one of his men.
Who is this you're talking about?
A fellow called Ole Hertzberg.
Oh.
And his parents and him came up in 23.
Oh, hi, girls.
Hello, Pootsy Pootsy. Hello.
All right, what time is it?
Hello.
What?
Well, do you want to interview them?
And then come back and get you.
What's the matter with our boat?
Nothing anymore.
He or she.
One of the things I'm interested in is how people still bring their faith from an environment and culture in the city where they live, where they might typically go to church or have a ritual that they go through, but bring that faith to bear here.
Well, what we did was, we read a certain amount every day anyway, but Prue would always read we had a copy of the prayer book, our prayer book up here, Book of Common Prayer, and she would read the appropriate readings and prayers for this Sunday, which are there. In other words, what she would have been hearing if she'd gone to church. But we didn't feel guilty that we were godless because we weren't going to church. That's one thing about going through a war. You don't go to church very regularly, and maybe that's why you value it a heck of a lot when you do. I still remember my Christmas communion in 1944, and it certainly wasn't on Christmas Day, but it was in the middle of a pine forest in the snow and in the Reichswald, so, different. But we brought it with us, but we didn't. We sometimes discussed, should we get one or two other people together and have a sort of service, and then we decided no, that these were personal things, and if you do that sort of thing, are you implying that they are not what they should be, or are you implying that you are a close relative of God? Neither of which is true. So we decided we'd do our own thing, and she was brought up an Anglo-Catholic, and so that's a tradition a bit hard to find in this country. You can in big cities, but anyway, that was it was, I think, something else we had in common. In fact, a big thing we had in common, because of course there were lots of things we didn't have in common. I mean, some of the important things we did, obviously, but you know, this was a shock in a way. This was a new country and different people, different way of speaking, though that never fazed her, because she, as you probably remember, she never lost her English accent. But and your father used to tease her about that, and as I say, she used to say, in effect, you know, the pot's calling the kettle black, because your father was very Southern, and when he chose to be, he was very, very Southern, and he'd put it on for her benefit, I know, and but no, you're right, they were good friends, and
What,
yeah.
what's one of your fondest memories about my father and uncle?
Oh, hard to get. Well, two things I can think of the first year we were up here. I don't know whether you've heard that we used to play cricket down in the cricket fields, as we call it. And of course, hardly cricket. As Prue would say, that's not cricket. Because we only had one wicket, the other end was in the lake, and if you hit a boundary into the lake, you were out, not 4 or 6 runs. But after the war, the first year we were up here, we had no dock, and I found some boom logs over back in the marsh back there, and Hunter and Rob, and I can't remember if Bob was here, but I think it was just the 3 of us. We got them out of there and got them floating, and we sawed them in half, so we had 4 logs, and we towed them around. I guess we had a 5 or 4.9 or something motorboat, and then Rob and Hunter and I put cross pieces on and then put a deck on. It was pretty crude. I'll tell you what it was like. Do you remember your Aunt Clara's place before they finally put a real deck on it? The dock? Well, it was crumbly, and but you could get out of a canoe and later a motorboat. So that was one thing they did, and they were great. I remember Hunter and I trying to figure out whether we'd call it the 82nd Airborne 2nd Canadian Division dock. And the other thing I remember, and we had 2 or 3 of them, was we had the cricket matches again. And of course, the following year, it became different again because, well, I already had a wife, and then Hunter came up with a wife, and so there were more players. But, you know, it was going back to our childhood in a sense, I suppose, but it was great fun. The other things I think I remember that we get together as families and go down the French or around the Wanapitei or whatever en masse, usually in canoes. And you might not think that of your Uncle Hunter, but I think Emmy was keen. Well, we had canoes, and they were going to do that. And in fact, that's not fair, because I remember the last really good picnic we had with your mom and dad. We took canoes down to Ragged Lake and came back, and I remember that because Rob gave me his movie camera and asked me to take pictures of them paddling. And then, of course, he came over and got it in case I dumped, which I wouldn't, but still, I was glad that he had it back. But I remember that. And, you know, we'd go down there and just have a picnic together, and Prue and Emmy and Patricia would talk, and we'd fish from different vantage points. And and the kids would fish or swim or fight or whatever, and the dogs would run around. But it was just, sometimes I think Hunter and Emmy went on these trips because there isn't that much room on their island, or what, the original island. But of course, it wasn't a problem with you people. Although when we were small, one of the great, Mom liked to get out of here occasionally too. So we'd take our supper out, and we'd go in canoes and the flat-bottomed punt we had. And one of our favorite places was the bay, just beyond your Suicide Leap, as we call it, which in those days was a long way if you're small. And we'd picnic on that bay, and you can make damn sure there was never the slightest trace of our being there, because that was drilled into us, and we in turn drilled it into our kids. But it was different, and then we'd come back, and we'd swim there and then have supper. And it wouldn't be very elaborate supper, but it was a change. And Mom realized that it was a good idea to have a change occasionally. As I say, we worked after breakfast every morning at all the chores: wood, water, worms, fish. And once in a while she'd say, well, today I think we'll go on a canoe trip, which meant no chores in the morning. We'd have to be packing up, and then we'd spend all day. And probably say, as we got stronger, they'd go down to the Dalles and picnic, looking at the rapids, and then maybe have tea at the entrance there on the way back. I remember Prue and I, Mom and Dad took our two daughters then, said, we'll look after them, you go off on a canoe trip. And we did the round trip. And we went up that way, and I think we went up and looked at Sturgeon Falls, and then we came back and we came down the west end, and when we hit Thompson's Bay, there was a powerful gale blowing, and it was raining. And nothing for it, we just had to pitch into it. By that time, Prue was a pretty good canoeist. And we proved it later out on the bay we go out with your family, and they'd go on motorboats, and we went in canoe. And anyway, they probably tow us down to the boardwalk, and we carry over, and then we go out from there. But I remember it let up a bit, and we had something to eat on, I guess, one of the islands behind Atwoods. And then I said, okay, the wind's gone down a bit, and we'd come across Thompson's Bay, of course. So we paddled up the Bad, and Dad and Mother were getting a bit worried, I guess, by the weather and everything. But we were passing the Warfields, and Dolly hailed us. And he could see we were sort of wet. And so, come on in. We said, well, we got to get back. The babysitters will be going on strike. Well, come in just for a minute. And he poured us 2 rums, which was just, we were wet and a bit cold, but we'd been paddling, but then he said, and this was a joke in the family for a long time, the weather so has moderated. And of course it had, but it also had moderated under the influence of a good stiff rum. So we took 2 meals on that trip, by the way.
Yeah, and I've done that trip and
Yeah.
have experienced some of that wind. Tell me about the bathing practices here on the French, how they have changed over time or not changed over time.
Well, I can only tell you about our family. We always had a skinny in the morning, and Prue and I always had a skinny in the morning. The other times of the day, you wear a bathing suit because goodness knows who's coming. Now, one thing I remember I was a little nettled about, when Mom and Dad came up, Barbara had been bathing with no bathing suit, and Mother insisted that she had to wear a bathing suit. And Barbara didn't give a damn, I suppose.
Barbara, your sister?
Hmm?
Barbara, your sister?
No. Barbara, my daughter.
Your daughter?
2
Okay.
years old.
Okay.
No, Mary's my sister.
Okay.
Oh, don't worry.
Yeah.
She would be wearing a bathing suit. Don't worry. as far as mother's concerned. But you know, Barbara was 2, and I mean, what the hell? And as when we were here by ourselves, we swam even at 11 sometime, or before lunch. If the coast was clear, we would swim without bathing suits, because I wanted to get away from this idea that all that was evil and so on. And you know, it was obvious if there were people around, then you didn't do that. But and Prue and I always had a skinny for years, and I went on having it after she died. But the kids now decree that I can't, because if I get into difficulties, I guess they're right. But anyway, and we did a lot of swimming. It was one of the great entertainment things. And
What's the most daring thing you've done up here?
oh gee. I don't know that I've done any daring things compared to your uncle and your father shooting the Dallas and practically getting their heads cracked on rocks. I don't know, probably the most daring thing, bringing a brand new wife, or relatively brand new wife and child, up to the wilderness when they had no experience of it. You know, the expertise fell on my shoulders until I could impart it, which was an easy job. Prue just adapted to it beautifully. And Barbara, of course, she'd lived here, she'd lived there. Another one, didn't faze her. And of course, she discovered blueberries, and so did Prue, of course. But even, you know, when our kids were small, we could continue the tradition that your parents had and that Hunter had of, you know, you could feed your children a bountiful meal of fish and blueberries most days. Sure, you had to work for it, but that was part of the joy of it. But now that's not so easy. One of the problems with the blueberries, as you may have noticed, is that when we get rain and we have blueberries, is that the gulls have so little to eat. They're starting to eat. They are eating them. I mean, I knew robins and thrushes and things ate them, but now the gulls are doing it, and it's just they can't find enough to eat. Because you remember we'd clean a catch enough to feed the family, so there'd be lots of heads and fins and guts and so on, and they were well fed.
One of your loves is watching birds. Tell me about that and your enjoyment.
Well, I guess I started it up here. You know, Dad was interested in a lot of nature, and I read a lot. But it makes a heck of a big difference if you have a good pair of binoculars. And at the end of the war, they took away from the Germans all their equipment, and I was on the divisional staff, and my opposite number on the Q side said he was going up to see what they had, and I was tied up. We were damn busy. We had the German army to demobilize. But he said, do you want anything? And everybody was saying, well, get me a Luger or something. And I said, well, if you see a good pair of binoculars, snaffle them for me. So he came back with a very heavy pair of Czech army binoculars that the Germans had swiped when they conquered Czechoslovakia. And they were very good, 8 by 40s. And so that gave me my first chance to have a really good look. Then when we moved to Port Hope, there was quite a lot of bird life around there. So that stimulated the interest. And then there was a naturalist group founded not long after we got there. And I joined that, and I'm a life member now, and a past president and all that jazz. But we still do a certain amount of work. I don't know whether you're conscious of the Audubon census, but there's a Christmas census on the continent, throughout the States and Canada anyway. And somebody puts a compass in at somewhere between Port Hope and Coburg, and there's a 5 kilometer radius. And then that's divided up, and we're given a section to cover, and we have to count all the species and the numbers within the species, which is tricky. I mean, if a flock of starlings fly by, the leader will say, "How many did you make that?" And I said, "Well, probably about 50." And then Ian Tate will say, "No, I think it was 60." And so we arrive at a consensus. In other words, you can't count every single bird, but you do count the number of species and the number of individuals within as much as you can. And we compile all that. It's rather like an election night. The different districts come in and they mark up the list. And then the total goes to Audubon somewhere in New England.
What have been some of the favorite birds you've watched here?
I always like great blue herons. Pileated woodpecker is always a great thing to see. The loon, of course, is probably the one that says North Country to me more than anything. Prue thought they were just wonderful. Whippoorwills, although I remember your father's great indignation when one sat outside their bedroom window one night, and we thought that was very funny. He said he couldn't find his gun in the dark, and then one night it happened to us out here, so we said to Rob afterwards, "Well, we understand what you were talking about." Whippoorwills, we used to have a lot of nighthawks. They're not here anymore, which is a pity, but whippoorwills, nighthawks, and loons particularly have always meant the French River. Herons now to a lesser extent, in that I can get them around home too, but they always were a big French River thing. And we didn't have any cormorants, of course. And you if you're lucky, it depends on how long you can be up and at what seasons of the year, you can get migration of warblers and thrushes and vireos and so on. But that's what I'm missing here. We very little on the island at all. I guess one of the highlights, we had a bald eagle years ago, and we had an osprey. And the osprey has been, I haven't seen them this year, but they've been around in the last few years. Just one, or I guess a pair. But,
well, my family refers to this area as Canada. How do you refer to it?
the French River, but we shorten it to the French, and some of our friends are very amused that we're going to the French. But it's always been that, and we know what it means. And
what does it mean to you?
Maybe a preview of heaven, as far as I'm concerned. If they have this beauty and this, sorry, am I mucking things up? If they have this beauty and this, and the people, the people are a great part of it. Prue used to say that it was lovely, but also we valued, we very seldom saw the balls other than up here. We didn't ever, well, very, very rarely saw the McDonald's except up here and the Warfields. So that was an added attraction. And I'm interested to notice that my grandchildren feel the same. Twice now, Harold and Janet have been here, and they're getting married in August. And your Uncle Hunter came down to several meals, I gather. And they were just fascinated with him. A, the way he talks, B, himself, and I gather he's been equally captivated by particularly Janet. He said he expected her to be charming and because she was Barbara's daughter, but anyway, he approved. So, you know, those things are great. I don't know, I'm sure my father would, if asked to draw up specifications for heaven, would be pretty close to this, and I wouldn't quarrel with that. It's not that you have nothing to do, because there's plenty to do, as you well know, if you own a cottage, or even if you rent a cottage, you've got a lot to do. But that's not bad. You also have some time to think. Fishing is a very good, especially if you're by yourself or if you're with somebody that you know well, so you don't have to chat all the time. Very good for the contemplative side of things. And unfortunately, increasingly, you're not interrupted by fish. I was Frank and Penny have given me 2. In her diary, she says, "This is a heavenly place. This is the first nice day we had. The scent of the pines, the peace." And I've always remembered that. Oh, and she goes on, I'm not a bit disappointed. And I realized that I must have talked about this place, and I'm sure she must have thought, nowhere could be as wonderful as that. I hadn't realized it, but obviously it's a big part of our lives. And Bob, she knew Bob over there too, of course, and we'd talk about it and what things we did and so on.
Well, let me ask the question again because I didn't get it on tape. But how will it feel for you if this is the last? How will it feel when you close the door for the last time up here?
Well, as I say, I think the Almighty's merciful, and you don't know that you've closed the door for the last time. In 1998, when we left, I knew Prue wasn't well, but I didn't expect things to happen as rapidly as they did. It proved to be her last visit here. And unless you get, well, Alison Ball was dying of terminal cancer, and they all knew it. And when she left, that was very hard. They were all in tears. But I guess I hope I never know that it's for the last time. If I did, I would feel the end of a very important part of my life. And I think I would be very grateful for all the joy and experience that I've had up here, including the people, because as Prue said, they were a very important part of the French River. And we felt that particularly because we didn't see them the rest of the year, or very seldom. And so it was a part of the French River. And of course, as our children grew up and there were others to play with, didn't always match, but for instance, my sister Mary and Clara were not really the same age. They tended to play because they were girls, but I think the parents tended to put them together. And whereas I never felt conscious of the fact that maybe you and Hunter were driven down here to play with us. I mean, I don't think it was any compulsion on either side. We were glad to have more people. And of course, when we got the cricket going, that was, you see, you baseball people, and let's face it, it wasn't cricket as the English know it, but my Uncle Jim got us interested, and we had very crude equipment. And one of my cousins came up. I wasn't here. I was working on the lake boats, but he was a real cricketer. He'd been to TCS where I eventually taught, and he was, of course, scandalized. And Ian was very good. We used a lacrosse ball, and Ian he'd perfected. Ian turned into a very good cricketer later. He bounced it off a rock over there and into the wicket. And of course, that's not cricket. And you don't have that and Edward was bowled clean first ball, and he was furious. Well, it's not fair. This is our rule, you know. Similarly, if you hit a boundary into the lake, you're out. You don't get 6 runs. and he, you know, he played along. But
Well, I missed some of the section where you were talking about this being like heaven. Could you kind of replay the tape for me? I know it won't be quite
uh,
as off the cuff, perhaps, but
well, you asked me what I thought of it, and it would be very hard, apart from the fact that it's an experience that our whole family has shared and treasured over the years. I hope the Almighty has arranged to have some of it in heaven, because it seems to me that would be a very good start. Dad will want a few trout streams as well, and I wouldn't mind some, but the French and the fishing and the rocks and the trees and the scenery and the sky, and city dwellers aren't too conscious of the sky. And this is even, I mean, I live in a town, and when I go out west to the ranch, one of the American states has on their license plate, I think, the big sky. Well, that's what you get in the foothills, let me tell you. But, and that was something Ian and I were talking over the other day, that we lived in Port Hope. We had friends who had property in the country. Prue used to go riding with the Corellis, and they had beautiful woods and things to go through. And two of our friends had woodlots and fields and so on that we were welcome to bird in, hike in, ski in the winter. We did a lot of cross-country skiing. And then when we left Port Hope, we came here, or we went to the ranch. And occasionally we'd go out to the west coast and visit another friend. And I remember one holiday she and I had by ourselves on the extreme west coast of Vancouver Island, near Long Beach. And it was absolutely marvelous. Of course, she had a thing about the sea, because she was brought up in sight of the sea and within smell of the sea. And anytime we went to either coast, she had to put her foot in it, for instance, just to make sure it was still there. So she spent her life in really very pleasant surroundings, and that is something that I am very glad to remember.
Well, if this was the last summer you had up here, what would you like to say to Uncle Hunter?
Young man, carry on. Carry on's our regimental motto, because the first colonel was shot in the first war, and as they went to pick him up, he said, "Carry on, you know, don't." I know I don't have to tell him. Nothing will stop him coming up here. I don't think even Emmy will be able to stop him coming up. She may eventually, when he's 100, may insist on having you come up with him, or somebody, but I remember he told me when we were down there in February, he'd already started looking at his stuff to take to the French River, and or to Canada, as you call it, and he said, my feet are itchy already. And of course he can't wait. I was telling you, he left on the 5th of June and arrived here on the 6th of June, which of course is D-Day. So I said, "Oh, D-Day," and he said, "Yeah, and this one's real important." But I don't think, I think your father loved it too. I don't know whether he would have come up all by himself the way Hunter does, but he might have. Your father had many more interests than Hunter has. Although he's developed some, as you know. We're both studying each other's history and exchanging books and so on. And he's very well read on it now. And but you know, your dad would be photographing or fishing or painting or I don't think your dad was ever bored up here, was he? And I know damn well Hunter isn't. I think they'll go on the way we do. I mean, when I go, the family's going to carry on here. I'm sure of it. And I just hope that Andrew and Amy marry the right people so that their kids will carry on. And how are your kids on this? Do they like it?
My son would live up here year round if he could, and my daughters are really enjoying it, though they have not been here in 4 years.
Ah, why?
So, well,
Christina's been at university, I suppose.
she has, and
Where'd she go?
she is actually in Nashville at Belmont University
Oh, yeah?
studying classical voice. So
Good for her.
she has a beautiful
Oh.
voice, and
Prue and she would have had fun together.
right.
Prue had a beautiful voice.
Hmm.
I gathered from Cornelia that Emmy and maybe Anne are getting to the stage where this is a bit boring.
It can be.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
there are no young men hanging around.
Right.
But then, as Penny says, that soon passes, and they start coming up with somebody. And
What would you, if you had a piece of advice to pass down to one of your great-grandchildren, what would you like to pass down about this particular place?
about this place,
Mm-hmm.
well, at the moment, they'd all have to come from Alberta until Amy and Andrew and Amy get busy on the business. Well, first come and visit it. Talk to your parents and grandparents about what they find appealing about it, and then make up your own mind. My guess is that you'll find the same things appeal. Then after that, I don't know. I'd have to tell them to win the lottery so they could afford to come from Alberta every year.
What are some of the values you think that you've learned and your family has learned as a result of being here?
If you have your eyes open, you're much closer to nature. And if you have your eyes open, I think you can see a pattern. I'm always interested in the two schools of thought among scientists. Some say we've analyzed and destructed all kinds of things, and we know how everything works. And the other kind say we have analyzed and deconstructed and so on, and we are sure there's a divine skill in it. And I guess that goes back partly to your family background, but an awful lot goes, I think, to your own intelligence and intuition. You probably know at TCS, because through your cousin, that we had chapel regularly every day and once on Sunday. And when I first went there, it was twice on Sunday. And an awful lot of them weren't that interested. But it's surprising how much of it stuck. And when they come back, Prue and I used to be invited to the 50th reunion of classes, and that they still invite me as they come along. And that's one of the things they've discovered was really quite much more important than they realized. And they don't go into detail, but they were quite upset. The present man doesn't think the chapel's all that important, and I think they're surprised at themselves how much they're upset about it. But I certainly can't see. Well, you've experienced this from the time you were a boy. I can't see how you could miss that there must be some divine power, whatever it's called. I mean, the Indians called it Manitou, and they, by the way, were much better stewards of the environment than we are. I know you can point out all kinds of waste and stuff, but they respected the environment far more than we do. And I think that's going to be something we're going to have to answer for eventually. We're getting there, but not very fast.
Anything else about this area that you'd like to share on tape before we wrap this up?
I think this is a place of healing. We've had friends up here, my parents have, and Prue and I have, who'd lost somebody, or who, in one case, a very cruel divorce, and I mean cruel. Dad used to have a number of servicemen who've been wounded up here for various reasons, but they loved this kind of country, and he could keep an eye on them, but it has a great healing effect, and I think it's helped me since Prue died. It's not easy, but there is peace, and you have more time to yourself, and yet you can get company if you want it. I think the great thing is here, you know, we've got close friends, but we're not in each other's pockets. And I think that's really close friends.
I'm going to end with that. My daughters are here for me. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And, yep.
I hope you're not disappointed, but anyway.
I'm delighted. This is exactly what I'd hoped for.
Are you serious? I haven't actually. Dad, have I ever seen a mink here?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
They are around.
Yeah.
I remember fishing off the deep reefs, and one came along and just sort of went up and down, paid no attention to us.
Of course not. Wow.
Poor abused dog. Nobody loves you.
Oh, that dog
Everybody
gets,
hates you.
that dog gets tons
Poor
of love.
dog.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Now this was my parents' bedroom, and then eventually my wife got arthritis in her shoulder really badly, so we put in a shower so she could
That was
soak
nice.
that.
Yeah.
And of course, have you got power at? Has Patricia got power?
No.
No.
Or I don't mean hydro. I mean electric car.
Nope.
We have a solar panel.
Do you
And it
now?
charges those two batteries you see just inside the door.
That's nice.
So we
you
could-
need to talk to my dad about that.
Well, Hunter's got it now.
Does he really?
Yeah.
Hunter
It
has
took
it,
him a long
Dad.
time to
I know.
See?
I'm not against it.
And
I want to hear it again.
well, you can't, you can't run on. We have two standing lamps. One's up
Right.
in the veranda, or we could have two in here. We have Prue and I had a light over our beds, and there's a light over the sink and a light over the dining room table. Well, you don't want to burn them all at
Right.
once, but
That's really nice, though.
well, and when you think of well, I guess even your parents would use coal lamps or
I know.
Aladdin lamps or candle lanterns, and
We're still using
these
that.
cottages could go up like anything if you had
They could
done
go on
that. So
fire.
it's one of the great things we did. And my brother waited until we had several years of it, and it really worked. So he got it put in, the friend of ours that did ours for us put his in, and then where Chan has now.
Oh
you see.
yeah.
And then Hunter got Bill Casey to put his in, and he's wired for sound. But it's an outlay at first, but
Right.
hydro
I know.
would probably bring a cable to your island for about $10,000, and then you'd pay,
Go ahead.
I don't know, $100 a foot or something to get it from
Really?
to where you want it.
Do you
I mean,
ever
they're
look at
not
this?
really interested.
Yep,
I don't.
that's actually more
I
fun to
wouldn't
look
want
through.
them
Yeah.
because once you've got it, they can put the rates up and up and up.
Mhm.
So far,
But this
our
is just
government hasn't
easier.
figured out how to
Yep.
tax the sunlight that we use. I'm sure they'll figure it out eventually.
Yeah, I'm sure
They
they will.
collect it on the equipment.
Hey, Bonnie.
Not on the sunlight.
Well, give them a chance.
So your wife is from England?
Hmm?
Your wife is from England?
She was, yeah. And I was telling you, well, no, I guess your dad wouldn't remember, but his father remembered her coming out here. And we came up here first in 1946. I hadn't been up here for 10 years. I'd been working when I was at university,
Wow.
and then I was in the war, so it was something.
That is a big gap.
And she just loved it.
Aww.
So, and we had a 2-year-old daughter at the time, so, and she loved it. Of course, she lived in a lot of places. She was born the night the bus bombs started in England. And I gather it's bad enough having your first baby anyway. And they kept taking her off the table. They thought they were low-flying aircraft, you see. And they didn't know what they were. And so Barbara's early years or months were punctuated with loud bangs.
Getting tired.
See, in fact, I managed to get down to the christening, which was on the 4th of July. The Americans celebrated as a holiday as a result.
Right. Yes.
And the person got to renouncing the devil and all his works, and we heard one coming. And believe me, it took your mind off the service because you listened,
Okay, what's that?
and if the sound got there and cut, it was all right because it would land over there. But if the sound stopped there, then it would likely hit you. So
Right.
no use pretending, everybody was listening.
Wow.
I remember I wrote to thank the vicar afterwards, and I mentioned this, and he wrote back. Well, he wanted some information once I sent it, and he thanked me for that, and he said, "Yes, I did notice it." Well, we all did.
How could you not?
But they put, this customer putting the baby out in the morning to get fresh air and so on, they put her out in her pram in front of the house. They lived in the country. And there was a hell of a bang. We went out and picked a piece of shrapnel off Barbara's pram, and they were shooting at the buzz bombs, but anti-aircraft ammunition is fused to self-destruct, so that if it doesn't hit an aircraft, in which case it'll explode, it'll come down in several or umpteen pieces, not in one. And so she got a piece of the self-destructing ammunition. So from then on, they put her inside the porch and left the door open. So she had a noisy start to
Ouch. Look at that boat.
I want that.
Yeah.
I also wanted to picture the red boat. The what? The red boat. Is that like
Oh, you know what would be fun?
What?
Some time-lapse photography right here.
Yeah, it would. It would look so cool.
Yes! Come here, little birdie.
I was just about to say, I wish I could get a picture of Bonnie taking a picture.
Stop me!
Bonnie, stop taking pictures of the same bird.
I'm afraid. Where'd it go? Okay, I'm done. Sweetie, you coming?
I don't want to get into that. Can we stop filming for just a second?
Yeah.
You gonna wait, yo? What? You gonna wait? You know how slow I am.
over the bridge and back.